industry as a whole has been saying, we saw about 10 years growth in a period of 2 years. So it just accelerated everything. And it's an exciting time for DTC.
Got us to the future faster than we thought. Do you think it's going to stay at that growth?
So we wanted to look at through 2021 when things were open again to see what that did to the results. And what we saw was that growth continued. Wine sales spiked considerably. E-commerce wasn't necessarily as high as it was, but the DTC industry as a whole continued to grow. So we have no reason to think that with the right care from the wineries, that consumer behavior is going to continue.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 178. How has the pandemic positively impacted the wine industry? Why is the percentage of women buying wine online rising faster than it is for men? And how do consumers benefit when wine producers have access to more and better data? You'll hear those stories and more in part 2 of our chat with Andrea Smalling, Chief Marketing Officer at WineDirect, and Cathy Huyghe, Forbes wine columnist and CEO of Enolytics. You don't need to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but I hope you'll go back if you missed it after you finish this one. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show with the continuing story of publishing my new wine memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Depression, and Drinking Too Much. How does the witch theme tie into your book? One of my online course students asked me recently. I don't really see you as a witch, she said. My journey in my memoir changed the way I looked at both witches and myself. Not all witches are bad. Think of Glinda the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz or Samantha Stevens in Bewitched. So did I end up embracing the positive powers of my inner witch? It wasn't that easy. I was really forced to dig deep, to battle my darker impulses. And that's the real magic I want to share with you in my book. I've always been fascinated with literary witches, from the three sisters in Shakespeare's Macbeth to the witches of Eastwick. These women were persecuted for their powers, or more likely, their misunderstood and feared skills. Even Maleficent, played by the magnificent Angelina Jolie in the 2014 Disney movie, was originally a good fairy with special powers over plants and herbs until the man she loved betrayed her. Same old playbook. But there's a happy ending. She regains her powers through the phoenix, rising again. And it's her kiss, not the one from the prince, that wakes up Sleeping Beauty. I thread the stories of various witches through my memoir, and even though I felt hunted like a witch during the year I chronicle in the book, I'm not equating my experience with the horrors that women in the 17th and 18th centuries faced, and for which thousands were wrongly murdered. Rather, their stories enkindled my desire to call out the sexism and misogyny that still drives unfair and often cruel treatment of women today. The methods are far more subtle, but the results can still feel devastating. But luckily, we can still live happily ever after. As promised, I'll share a beta reader review with you now. This one is from Diane in Detroit, Michigan. Quote, I really enjoyed the book. I admire her courage in sharing all of this. I think it goes beyond the world of wine and also speaks to online bullying, women still feeling inferior to men and struggling to be feminine but aggressive. The book also speaks to the fine balance of loving wine and not being an addict. This is very personal for me in many ways. There are other aspects that are universal. Suffering is a way to enlightenment. I read most of the book in one day because it was so interesting. End quote. Thanks, Diane. I've posted a link to a blog post called Diary of a Book Launch in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/178. This is where I share more behind the scenes stories about the journey of taking this memoir from idea to publication. If you want a more intimate insider seat beside me on this journey, please let me know that you'd like to become a beta reader and get a sneak peek at the manuscript. Email me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. In the show notes, you'll also find my email contact, the full transcript of my conversation with Cathy and Andrea, links to their report and their websites, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find the live stream video version of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/178. Okay, on with the show. And Gen Z, what trends have been reported generally, even apart from your study? Is that part of the new hope that they like wine and they're buying it?
So we are definitely seeing that. I would call them for now very equal opportunity drinkers because they're also drinking a lot of cocktails. They're trying a lot of different things. There's also some data that's suggesting that, and it'll be interesting to see if this sticks, but low alcohol, no alcohol wines are definitely becoming more popular among this crowd. And it's something that throughout my career, I've seen that kind of pop every once in a while, but it never really stuck. But this seems to be the first time that it is grounded in something that seems like it's going to last a while. That whole idea of we don't want to be fall down drunk. We want to enjoy ourselves, but we just want to kind of keep it together and be good the next day and feel healthy. So that's going to be really interesting. But, as both Cathy and I say, meet them where they are, offer them what they want at this moment in their lives. So make sure you're speaking in a way that's approachable but not patronizing to them, but also offering those more appealing prices because a lot of them it's trial phase and they don't want to, try with $150 Napa Cabernet necessarily. So making sure that there's offerings that are going to get them engaged with your brand, but then also understanding that I think it's natural that over time your tastes change. I mean, I laugh because Gallo hired me partially because I was young. And at that point, 1994, there was already the whole idea of young people aren't drinking wine. And I was drinking whites in and maybe coolers, but now I love everything, so over time, I think your tastes evolve. And I think that's going to happen with these generations as well. But I think it is incumbent upon the wineries as well to recognize who they are now and speak to them in a way that's going to get them to engage over time.
Yeah. So the rise of Gen Z and younger drinkers is part of your optimism, but we've heard a lot of, as you've even said in your report, doom and gloom about the wine industry on the decline.
Yes.
So how did this report give you hope? Maybe the first question should be, how much did online or direct-to-consumer business increase over the last 5 years or over the pandemic, however you want to frame it?
What we're seeing for sure is that this is one piece of the wine industry, the DTC piece of the wine industry. There's a lot that's not analyzed here, right? And we don't claim to be analyzing it, but the three-tier system, the wholesale system, that's an entirely additional part of the industry. But within DTC specifically, what we are seeing is decidedly positive. We have reason to feel positive about the future when we're talking about DTC. One aspect of that, and this sort of goes back to dovetail really nicely, Natalie, with the conversation at the beginning about wellness and lower no alcohol drinks, not wanting to be drunk at the end of the night. Those, I think, are playing into the conversation as well. And I don't think it's such a bad thing. People are being more aware of alcohol consumption. The question is, are they going to still buy, or can we reach more consumers so that the volume is still going to be accounted for? If not necessarily, from volume across more people, if not necessarily the people who are already engaged keep buying more. It's a horizontal versus a vertical question maybe at some point. So I think that those factors, especially the of wellness and drinking less, but also, experimenting with other things, experimenting with spirits, because, the theory or the idea is out there that spirits has fewer calories.
Mm-hmm.
And so something like that, though, how is the wine industry going to respond to that? And what kind of information are we going to be able to communicate around, whether that's true or not true? Or how are we going to engage the people who want a healthy lifestyle? Those, I think, are some of the questions for the future
Yes.
that we do need to engage in.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, what jump did you see, roughly speaking, for? I know online is just probably one part of DTC, but however you want to frame it again, what kind of jump did that make, say, from the beginning of the pandemic to now?
From 2017, so the duration of our study is the 5-year period, the accumulated growth was 53% for DTC. And interestingly, if I had a graph I could show you, but if you take the growth from 2017 to the beginning of the pandemic, it was on a growth trajectory. And then you see a jump. And it's really interesting. So, what we've been saying in general, I think the industry as a whole has been saying we saw about 10 years growth in a period of 2 years. So, if we had just straight lined it, we would have been at a certain level, and we're really where we would have been 10 years from now. So, it just accelerated everything. And I think there's a ton of reasons for that, but it's an exciting time for DTC for sure.
Wow, got us to the future faster than we thought.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. And so, also just sort of reading through your report, do you think it's going to stay at that level or at that growth? Why don't you think that'll sort of backtrack as things open up, tasting rooms and that sort of thing?
The nice thing about this report, and I think the reason why we were thinking about doing it at the same time that Cathy and the Enolytics team was thinking about doing it, is because things had started to open up again. So the pandemic, whether it will ever be officially over, I don't know if we can say that, but for the most part, things had opened up again. So we wanted to look at through 2021 when things were open again to see what that did to the results. And what we saw was that growth continued. So if you dig into the numbers, you see that on-site wine sales spiked considerably. E-commerce wasn't necessarily as high as it was, but the DTC industry as a whole continued to grow. So we have no reason to think that with the right care from the wineries, that consumer behavior is going to continue.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think too that the idea is to continue on with this report. We've already seen Q1 numbers for 2022. So we'll be able to keep things updated and be able to really follow that very carefully.
Yes.
I think big picture though, the world is different now than it was pre-pandemic.
Yes.
The wine industry was slow to adopt technology, but boy, especially the DTC teams, I feel like they need a shout out, is that they saved the day. They had to be in there. They had to be on it. They weren't seeing foot traffic. So now what? So websites got better. The entire initiative to sell wine online is metamorphosed in a very serious, rapid way because of the pandemic. And so now consumers, I don't know that I would say we spoiled them, but the wine industry now has set a new bar for itself when it comes to selling online. And I feel like that is going to continue, and it's going to fuel this trend of e-commerce not slowing down. I think that's a big reason why it's going to stick.
Wow, that's encouraging.
We still have a lot of space to grow. If you look at fashion, for example, online, about 25% of their total sales are online. Wine is still 10%. So there's still a lot of runway to continue to grow. The other thing that I found so interesting is that much of that growth during the pandemic was from repeat buyers. That actually shocked me, which tells me that there is still a lot of work to be done to bring new buyers into the understanding of how to buy wine online. And that just, again, creates more potential to grow.
That's fascinating, because although this is a very industry-specific report, I think it's good news for consumers if more and more, especially smaller wineries, get online and you can get those wines that you just have no hope of finding in your local liquor store. This wine is all about the amazing, diverse world of taste. So I think even those who are listening to this who just love wine should be excited about these kind of trends that you're unearthing.
Definitely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Canada specifically. Yay, go Ontario.
Yay,
go
Canada.
You're almost there, Cathy. We've almost got you in here for
So
honorary
close.
Canadian. Yes. No,
Yes.
we'll get there.
Yes.
So as you're probably more familiar with our system here, Andrea, in that, we've got the provincial liquor boards, and for the most part, they're highly regulated across the country. There are a few provinces where it's less so, like Alberta. But what are the implications, if any, of this report for the Canadian wine scene?
Well, there's a few implications. So the regulatory aspect of it aside, there's a few things that were really interesting to me in the Canadian results. And one is that during the pandemic, for example, the Canadian wineries grew DTC much faster than the American wineries. So the 2020 results were huge in Canada and then kind of leveled off a little bit, whereas in the US, it kind of just gradually rose and continued to rise through 2021. And really interestingly, the level of discounting in Canada was negligible. So it seems like the US, I'm completely generalizing, but the US wineries kind of had that moment of panic of, oh my gosh, restaurants are closed. I've got all this wine. What do I do? I'm going to discount. Like that's kind of the immediate thought in terms of how do I spur up some sales. Whereas the Canadian wineries, their level of discounting was, I think 5%, which is tiny compared to the US and also compared to Australia. So that was really interesting. And I'd love to know, I know Mark Anthony Group, which I, worked with up in the Okanagan, and I know some of the things that they did that kind of support those findings. And I think there are things that the US wineries can learn from what they did for sure in terms of growing the business long term.
My only hypothesis on discounting would be that pricing has been so regulated in Canada in terms of very small discounts, and all these government-owned liquor boards have a socially responsible mandate. So you're not going to say, buy one case, get another one, and have a happy weekend.
Yes.
That might be it. But I'm curious as to why you think, even if it's speculation, why Canadian wineries embraced online commerce faster than the Americans, because we think of the Americans as more entrepreneurial in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And I, again, this is my own personal experience, but online shopping in general, I feel is more developed in the US than it is in Canada. So it really did surprise me. So I will say it's a combination of, it is DTC in total. So I think it's a combination of online, but also visitation. And I think in Canada, the winery areas are so condensed that I think the visitation aspect of it continued for as long as it possibly could. But then they did a really good job of kind of churning quickly to experiences. So I know Mission Hill, which is a winery I worked with up in Canada, very quickly pivoted and said, okay, so we're not going to have this acting as almost a national park, because in the past you'd have hordes of people and they come and they look around and it's lovely and then they leave. And they turned to really develop some wonderful experiences that they charged a lot of money for. And as a result, they did bring in buyers who came, had the experience, purchased a lot of wine, and their business results really, really went through the roof as a result. And I think a lot of the Ontario wineries did the same thing. I think they just were able to kind of pivot really quickly and embrace that idea of, the experience, which, ultimately, ideally leads to some online sales too.
Yeah. And I think the fact they're small would help that. And somewhere I was reading, they kind of turned winery tasting rooms into a restaurant-like experience. You made reservations, you paid more. It wasn't a free-for-all tasting bar. You sat down, you might get to talk to the winemaker. So yeah, that is cool.
So it's a better experience for everyone. And I think sales increase as a result.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, it's a better experience. And this is to also add to the conversation, which is that Canada and Australia both were represented in this report, but with sort of a hat tip to say, there's more to come. There will be a Canada specific report. There will be Australia specific report. It's not the scale that is in the US, but we also don't want to just say it's negligible. It certainly is not.
Right.
And so there are more reports coming, and one of them will be specifically about Canada.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Do you mind if I cycle back?
Sure.
I didn't answer your question about the borders and the shipping across provinces, because I do think that's a massive opportunity for Canada. And of course, as it turns out, I don't have an in on the Canadian government. But what I would suggest is, and from what I understand, federally it's allowed, but the provinces are the ones who are kind of stopping it. Yes. And I think your point about the smaller wineries is a big one. And I think if we could implore them to support the smaller wineries, because it's hard to get a listing in the LCBO. It's hard to get a listing in the BCLDB. And these guys are struggling to sell their wine. So if we can open up those borders and let them reach out and sell their wines, it's not going to take away from what's going on in the LCBO. The LCBO will be just fine. It would just be nice to be able to kind of help them understand that that's an opportunity.
Exactly, because they don't even make enough to fill those big channels. It's not a matter of being snubbed or not the right price. It's the volume's not there. And yet, again, in the wine industry, small is beautiful. If you've got a little artisanal boutique winery out in BC and I want it here in Ontario.
Yes, yes. It's
yeah.
good for tourism because, people would love to go visit a winery knowing that they can then, engage and have it shipped back home. I mean, there's so much opportunity. I think it'll come eventually. I think it's just a matter of time, but it would be nice if it happened sooner rather than later.
And it has to, Andrea, because I think wine is the most value-added products we make in the agricultural sector. There's no other product we put on the table that I can think of in its original packaging. We don't have the stickers of where the apples came from, but everyone wants to see the label of the wine. So many hands have gone into it, and it has so much spin-off economic potential that these borders have to come down.
They really do. They really do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to doing very much the Canada report
Yes.
and specifically the slice of the tasting room or cellar door channel in Canada. So being able to see kind of the breadth of that going back 5 years and what Andrea is saying about why the numbers are what the numbers are in Canada, I think that makes so much sense. And so let's really kick the tires around what the numbers say about that. That will be of interest to certainly wine growers in Canada, but also tourism in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that has skin in the game as well.
Absolutely. And I would think it'd be of interest to legislators who are trying to support their grassroots industries, literally grassroots. It has so much economic potential that I think it should be of interest to a lot. I mean, there's been groups like Free My Grapes established that are consumer driven. So having the data to back that up would be very powerful.
Definitely.
So can't wait for that Canadian report.
Yes.
Get on it. Landing in your inbox soon.
Yes.
Then it's coming.
Yes.
It's coming.
So what do you foresee to be future trends? What are you seeing now that, okay, so DTC is going to continue to increase? Anything else you're predicting, if anything, based on the findings so far?
I think that one of the things that this report, I hope, has done and communicated is the power of data, not just in terms of kind of insights and sort of sweeping sort of takeaways or opinions, but really being able to drill down into the granularity of it and making it relevant by winery to state by state to metro area by metro area. I feel like that's been not only like a light bulb that's gone off, but kind of it's hit in some ways like a lightning bolt. And that I feel is one of the things that's going to continue as well. Now that people can see what's possible, we're hearing a lot of feedback in terms of, so if you've done this, can you also do this? And if, now that this has happened, can we also look at this other thing? And so I feel like sort of for the future and kind of looking ahead, Natalie, definitely from the Enolytics perspective, there's just so much, I think, implications around the power of the technology to offer value to the wine industry, a level both of breadth, that 200 million data set record from WineDirect, as well as granularity in terms of being able to slice and dice to a really specific level that makes it highly relevant. To me, that's, I think, going to be one of the game-changing things moving forward.
I agree.
Yes. And I think when we talk about granularity, it's a business term that we all know and use frequently. But as a consumer, the way that translates to me is more personal experience. Like if you can get granular with the data, that means you know me better. That means I'll have a better experience when I come visit you, when I buy from you. You will know me. Like my favorite restaurant knows no olives, sparkling water, not still, and probably 27 other things. They probably got me on the high maintenance list, but that's okay. I like it. But that's what you can do with granularity is really personalize.
Yes.
So that's pretty exciting.
That's what I think is so fun about, Enolytics is really on the forefront of pushing how we use data and getting more robust, more granular. And what's fun about it is it doesn't take away from the things that we all love about the wine industry. So it's not like all of a sudden wineries are going to turn into the Gap or Banana Republic. It's going, to your point, just make the experiences that much better. And all the data is going on back here, but you're still going to have that wonderfully curated, personal, lovely experience that we all really want in a winery. And I think that's really nice.
Absolutely. So good.
I love that. It's sort of, then just to sum that up, I think that's a great way to say it. All this data that's happening is ultimately servicing the customer better, the consumer.
Exactly.
And let's give the consumer a better experience by using data, sort of running in the background, But if it can ultimately benefit that person's experience and help them stay as consumers longer or more deeply, that's amazing.
Yes.
Amen. I forgot to ask the question I was curious about. So it's upstream a bit, but I don't want to miss it. Why is the percentage of women purchasing online going up faster than men? I was curious about that.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think that we have probably hypotheses about that, Andrea. What do you
Yes.
think?
Okay.
You're
So
better informed
I
on
have
this.
I have a couple of hypotheses. So one of them is in the way that the data is reported, and that is that club members, for the most part, whether they're purchasing online or in the tasting room, hit the club channel. And what we see is that men are overrepresented in club membership. And women are more represented in that just I'm going to the website to buy wine and that's what I'm doing. So I think part of it is in the way that the data is reported, but then also I think it is the growth of the younger generations. And I'm going to completely overgeneralize here, but back in the day, men were making those wine purchases and they were the collectors and they're buying the bottle of wine to lay down for 10 years. And, that whole aspect of, I'm laughing because I'm saying the boomers and I'm only 4 years out of it, but let's call it the older side of the boomers. That was traditionally kind of how wine buying worked. And I think over time, women are getting much more involved in those purchases. They're buying for themselves and their friends, and they're buying for the family. And I think that is just that kind of natural change that we see in terms of how women are purchasing.
Interesting.
It's really clear in the data, Natalie, that women spend less, like sort of the average price per bottle for women is less than the average price for men, but women do buy more frequently.
So we make up in volume what we
Exactly.
miss on the individual price parts. Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
I take that as we have more fun because we buy the wine and we drink it and then we buy some more wine. I think that's good.
Yeah, as opposed to buying a trophy wine, if you will, and laying it down the cellar.
Laying it down and waiting for that special occasion before you open it. And yes.
Exactly. And we are still, for better or worse, the social conveners, the family dinner organizers, all the rest of it. So,
yes.
The person who's organizing the family budget,
yes,
who doesn't want to spend, had $200 on a bottle of wine.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. Is there anything else you want to add about the report before we go into what I call the lightning round, which is just fun and more about your personal preferences? Anything that we missed about the report that you wanted to add?
I think it's just exciting. It's an exciting moment. Yes. It's an exciting moment to start pulling out the insights that have been with us all along.
Yeah. And you've got a future series of 7 reports or something coming down the pipe, including a focus on Canada. So that'll be excellent.
Yes.
Boy, no pressure on the whole Canada report.
I know, right?
Andrea?
I think that's this weekend's task, right?
Please email both of them now if you'd like to know more about our market.
Yes.
All right. For each of you, what is your ideal setting for having a glass of wine?
For me, it's the end of the day, end of the workday while I'm making dinner. That is my kind of transition into, even though I might get online later at night, it's that transition into just relax, walk away from the computer for a little bit, enjoy a glass of wine, make some dinner.
Nice.
I am such a better cook when I have a glass of wine in my hand. It's unbelievable. Such a better cook. I definitely love drinking wine with friends, but there's something to be said as well for having just like a contemplative glass of wine by myself and just take an hour to drink a glass. Happy to. Yes, please.
Very nice. And let's see. Is there something that you believe about wine with which some people might disagree?
Well, I will say for me, I am very much an equal opportunity drinker, and I believe that there's good wine at literally all price points. So I'm spoiled because I get to drink a lot of wonderful wines that are very expensive, but I believe very strongly that you can find really nice wines that are significantly less expensive and enjoy them just as much.
Yeah. And for me, I think that a friend who refers to it as chateau cardboard, and he talks about being not getting invitations over to people's houses for dinner because they think that they just have to serve him this great wine. But actually, he's flattered, and I agree with him on this. He's flattered when somebody will serve him the chateau cardboard, so to speak, because that means that they don't think he's a
They're
snob
comfortable.
about wine, or
Yes.
that
Yes.
they're comfortable. There's a level of familiarity around it.
I agree. Like, it's the lonely life if everyone thinks they cannot bring wine to your house, or that similarly can't invite you over because of the wine. But the only exception I have had to make for that is a homemade wine that was not well done. So
Oh.
I have a well-watered fern in the corners. So it's not conking out on me.
Definitely. Definitely. Yes.
Are there any childhood foods that you can remember that would be fun to pair with wine today?
So I come from a family that's descended from Polish and Tyrolean immigrants. And my mom would make, it's basically the cuisine is anything with potatoes and water, and butter, if you have it. Like no salt, just potatoes and water. And one of the things that they make is called laksha. And it's basically mashed potatoes and water and rolled out into kind of like, it's almost like a chapati and toasted in butter back and forth. And it's extremely heavy and extremely buttery. You eat like two and you're done for the day.
Wow.
But I feel like a wine pairing would be like just a sleek white wine that has a lot of acidity to just kind of counterbalance all of the heaviness of that. For me, one like a smell of childhood is that butter and that potato and that kind of cooking coming together.
Yes.
And we didn't have wine in the house, like it just wasn't part of it. But now, if I would ask my mom to make that, that's what I'd want to have on the table. Is it Grüne Veltliner or something really, really bracing in terms of acidity?
Yes.
Sounds great. Andrea, do you have one?
Yeah. So for me, my family is Canadian for generations, but my husband's family, we met very young, is Jamaican. And so there was a lot of curry chicken, a lot of spicy foods. And they weren't big wine drinkers. We were teenagers at the time, so we weren't drinking wine. But now I love to kind of play with what wines will actually pair appropriately with the curry or like jerk chicken, like very heavily spiced foods. And it's kind of similar to what Cathy's saying, but I love Gewürztraminer. That's kind of been my go-to, and it's hard to find here. There's not enough of them, but that's kind of been my go-to with any kind of spicy food. And it's just a lovely combination for sure.
It is. It's so exquisite.
That's a
Yeah.
good call.
Having one last night from Grey Monk in BC, and it was just so
Oh,
beautiful.
I love that wine.
Oh, the rose petal, the
Yes.
lychee. I know it all sounds stereotypical, but it's so
No, it's
amazing.
wonderful.
It's like drinking a bouquet of flowers, but really good.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, Canada wine envy over there.
I know.
Like, I want to try
We
that.
need to-
Like, what is
we
this?
need to
What is
go-
this beautifulness?
We need to go to the Okanagan and plan a meeting in real life.
Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely. Is there a weird food and wine pairing you've ever had? Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't.
I can say a really bad one that I had early in my career that is so in California, and especially with Gallo, Red Zinfandel, which we called it back then because there was also White Zinfandel. Red Zinfandel is kind of everywhere, but we were also eating a lot of kind of spicier Asian foods. And as it turns out, a Red Zinfandel paired with some kind of Asian food is a terrible combination because you just have this mouthful of pepper. I mean, it was like you can't taste the wine, you can't taste the food. It's just a mouthful of pepper.
Oh, wow.
It was, that was a learning experience for sure.
I was actually going to say a very similar thing, Andrea, in the sense of like red wine and Asian food, especially like egg rolls,
Yes.
or I feel like anything almost with soy sauce
Yes,
is just not a good idea. Just don't do it.
definitely.
Don't do it.
That's really hard, especially if you get any sweetness too in the dish. It'll really do a job on your wine. Your mouth will not be happy.
Exactly.
If there's someone outside of the wine world, living or dead, whom you'd love to share a bottle of wine with, who might that be?
The person who comes to mind for me actually is Helen Keller.
Ah,
And Helen Keller, because she somehow figured out how to communicate, obviously, with serious impediments. And I would love to put a glass of wine or two or maybe three in front of her and have her communicate however she wants to communicate about what she's experiencing in the wine.
that would be fascinating. Yes.
Oh my goodness. It just brings to mind the Chapoutier labels of Braille. Not that she'd need it, but for this analysis. But that would be such an interesting experience to see how she'd describe the wine.
Yes,
Huh.
definitely.
Andrea, is there anyone who comes to mind for you?
So for me, I think it would actually be Josephine Baker. I don't know if either one of you are familiar with her. She was
A singer?
Yes,
jazz
a
singer. Yeah.
famed singer, dancer, and she was famous in the United States, but moved to France. And she became just celebrated in Paris. And she had this famous kind of, she had bananas around her waist and like no top on. It was this whole thing. But I find her fascinating because on one hand, she was able to reach a level of fame in Paris that she wasn't able to in the United States just because of the time. But I often wondered if she felt like that was a good thing or if she felt like she was kind of taken advantage of almost.
Interesting.
But she also just seemed really fun. So I think it would just be fascinating to sit and have a glass of wine and just hear all about her life and kind of what she really felt. Because you see images of her, but that's really all that's left at this
Right.
point.
Was she at her height? Was it in the 1920s or what?
Yes, I want to say in the 20s, maybe even earlier.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember the hats, like
Fascinating. Yes, you can
tight
see, like, you can
hats,
picture
little
her.
beads. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Iconic. If either of you could put a billboard up in downtown Toronto or wherever you like, could be New York, San Francisco, what would it say?
Mine would say, be kind. As simple as that is, I just think that it's all that we need in the world right now. Just be kind.
True. That's true.
Yeah, that's a great one. If I were thinking generally, it would be take a breath. Take a breath.
Yes.
If I were thinking about wine, it would be take a sip so that you enjoy
Yes.
it. Take a sip.
And then read the report. You could advertise your report at this, maybe just a little URL down the corner.
Exactly.
Or just drink it. Just drink it.
Yes.
Just drink
That's
it.
what it is.
Yes.
I
Just
love
drink
that.
it.
Yes.
Not to get morbid, but what wine would you like to serve at your funeral?
This is such an interesting question.
Very
I
interesting.
love that you asked this question.
Yes.
Do you have an answer at the ready, Andrea?
I don't, but I will come up with one very quickly.
I can offer one. I'd probably go with a sparkling wine for celebration. Might be cliche, but I do want everyone to drink the good stuff at my funeral. Don't cheap out just because I'm gone and you think,
Yes.
oh, we don't need to worry
Yes.
about quality now. Yes, you do. I want you to enjoy the good stuff at the last time we get together.
Exactly. It's funny. That's where my head was going. I was thinking, bring all those bottles that you've been laying down for a special occasion that you haven't, just bring those now and drink them.
Exactly.
Yeah. And mine actually is similar to the sparkling wine, but my head went to sweet wines actually. If we're going to sort of be talking about a life well lived, which I hope people will say at my funeral, let's see how sweet it was.
Yes.
Talk about how sweet it was.
Absolutely lovely. All right. One last question for both of you. Is there a wine tip or piece of advice that you can share with our listeners that's perhaps made your own wine drinking more pleasurable or even something to avoid? It can be a what not to do or whatever you like.
The billboard comes back to mind, which is just drink the stuff. Just drink it. Just enjoy it. If you like it, don't worry about why you like it. Just drink it. Just enjoy it. Just drink it.
Definitely. For me, I think it would be just something fun that I love to do in terms of, if you just want to have a fun evening with friends, go to a store and pick a varietal and then buy that varietal from different areas, different appellations all around the world and taste the differences. Because again, going back to it's an agricultural business, that whole idea of terroir, I find it fascinating how different the styles can be from appellation to appellation. It's just kind of a fun little exercise to play with.
Yeah, love it. Love it. You've inspired me again as to why I love writing about wine. Thank you both for doing that. What a great conversation. What great insights in your report. I so appreciate the time you've spent with me. It's just flown by. So thank you both.
It was super fun. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And where can people find you both online?
So you can find me online. Well, our website is WineDirect.com. My email is andrea.smalling@winedirect.com.
Similar thing, Enolytics.com, Enolytics, Enolytics.com. And I'm just Cathy with a C, Cathy at Enolytics.com. You do not have to know how to spell my last name. I promise. Just Cathy is fine.
Huyghe. Is that right?
Close enough.
I shouldn't have tried. Oh dear. It was going so well. Just wrap it up, Nat. Oh my God. Anyway, well, thank you both. I hope we can get together soon in person and have a glass or three of this wonderful beverage we all love. So I'll say goodbye for now, but thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Andrea.
Bye.
Bye-bye. there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Andrea and Cathy. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, at least there were some upsides from the pandemic on the wine industry in terms of moving it forward a decade, in terms of selling online and tightening direct connections between those who make wine and those who drink it. 2, I found it fascinating that the percentage of women buying wine online is rising faster than it is for men. Though I guess this does make sense, given women still buy most household items. And 3, getting granular on the data means getting more personal with consumers in terms of their experience in buying wine, whether that's in person at the winery or online. In the show notes, you'll find links to Cathy and Andrea's report and websites, my free online wine and food pairing class, and the video versions of these conversations. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/178. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or would like to be a beta reader of my new memoir at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. You won't want to miss next week when I chat with Yanina Doyle, host of the Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat podcast. She's interviewing me, and we get into all sorts of fun stories and shenanigans. In the meantime, if you missed episode 88, go back and take a listen. I chat about how a wine name impacts its price with Dr. Antonio Mantonakis. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
Not only were participants evaluate the taste of the wine as being higher quality in terms of the overall evaluation when it was more difficult sounding, but participants also reported a higher willingness to pay for the wine.
I'm assuming that for the difficult one, they were willing to pay more. They thought it was a better wine.
Yes, that's correct. What was also more interesting that we were a little bit surprised by is that this difference was pronounced even for participants who had a higher knowledge about wine. When a consumer is more passionate about wine, they're really paying attention to the label and maybe the vintage and these other characteristics that they try to use as cues to evaluate the quality.
And that makes more sense. Not that they would be more gullible, being knowledgeable, but that they're just paying more attention to the details.
If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wines and stories we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a wine that you recently purchased online.
You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.